In the spring of 1901, a photograph sat forgotten in a dusty archive box in Portland, Maine. The image showed a simple white farmhouse with wooden shutters and a wraparound porch. A family of 5 stood in front of the building, their faces blurred by the long exposure time cameras required back then. For over a century, this photo remained unremarkable, just another piece of history filed away and ignored. But when archivist Isabel Tate pulled it from storage on a quiet Tuesday morning, she had no idea that what she was about to discover would shake the foundations of everything historians thought they knew about rural America at the turn of the century. Isabel had been working at the Portland Historical Society for 3 years. She spent most of her days cataloging old documents, photographs, and artifacts that told the story of Maine's past. It was repetitive work, but she loved it. There was something magical about holding a piece of history in your hands, about being the bridge between the past and present. On this particular morning, she was going through a collection donated by the family of a deceased local photographer named Isabel Tate, who had documented farm life throughout New England in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The farmhouse photo seemed ordinary at first glance. Isabel noted the details in her catalog: white paint, aging wood, typical architectural style for the period. The family appeared to be dressed in their Sunday best, probably excited to have their picture taken. Photography was still relatively new and expensive in 1901, so having your image captured was a special occasion. Isabel smiled as she imagined the family's excitement that day, the children probably squirming as they tried to stay still for the camera. Then she noticed something odd. In the upper right window of the farmhouse, there appeared to be a face, but it wasn't like the faces of the family standing outside. This face was different. Wrong, somehow. Isabel picked up her magnifying glass and leaned closer to the photograph. Her blood went cold. The face in the window was pale, almost translucent, with dark hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly at the camera. The features were distorted, stretched in a way that made it look barely human. And, strangest of all, the figure appeared to be wearing clothing from a different era entirely, something that looked more like colonial dress from the 1700s. Isabel's hands trembled as she set down the magnifying glass. She told herself it was just a trick of light and shadow, maybe a reflection or damage to the photograph. But deep down, she knew she was looking at something that shouldn't be there. She grabbed her phone and took several pictures of the photograph, making sure to capture the window detail. Then she did what any modern researcher would do. She started digging. The first thing Isabel wanted to know was the location of the farmhouse. She searched through Isabel Tate's notes and records. Crowan, referencing addresses and property records from 1901. It took her 2 full days, but she finally found it. The farmhouse had been located on rural Route 7, about 15 miles outside of Portland. The family's name was Morrison. According to census records, the family consisted of William Morrison, his wife Sarah, and their 3 children, Aidan, Nico, and Peyton. They had lived on that property since 1897. But here's where things got strange. In 1902, just 1 year after the photograph was taken, the Morrison family vanished. Not moved away, not died in some documented accident. Vanished. Isabel found a brief newspaper article from October 1902 that mentioned neighbors had reported the family missing. The local sheriff investigated but found no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. The house was empty, as if the family had simply walked away from their entire life. Their belongings were still inside. Food was still in the pantry. The livestock were still in the barn, unfed and distressed. It was as if the Morrisons had evaporated into thin air. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. She expanded her search, looking for any other information about the property or the area around it. What she found made her stomach turn. The Morrison farmhouse had been built on land that had a dark history. In 1776, during the Revolutionary War, a colonial family named the Hutchinsons had lived on that exact spot. According to historical accounts, the entire Hutchinson family was murdered in their home under mysterious circumstances. The killer was never found, and local legends claimed the house was cursed. The original structure burned down in 1780, and the land sat empty for over 100 years before William Morrison bought it and built his farmhouse. Now, Isabel had to ask herself a terrifying question. Was the face in the window connected to the Hutchinson murders? And did whatever happened to the Hutchinsons also happen to the Morrisons? She decided to dig deeper into Amaya Caden's collection, searching for any other photographs from that area or time period. What she found was even more disturbing than she could have imagined. Over the next week, Isabel discovered 6 more photographs from the same general area, all taken between 1898 and 1903. 3 of them showed different farmhouses, and in each one, there was something wrong in a window. Sometimes it was a face. Sometimes it was just a dark shadow that seemed to move between frames. And in every single case, the families who lived in those houses had either vanished or died under strange circumstances within 2 years of the photograph being taken. One photo showed the Carter family farm, taken in 1899. In the kitchen window, there was a dark figure with elongated limbs. The Carters were found dead in their home 6 months later, all of them appearing to have died of fright. Their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror, but there was no physical evidence of what had killed them. Another photo showed the Bennett property taken in 1900. A pale child's face appeared in the attic window, even though the Bennetts had no children. The Bennett couple disappeared in 1901, leaving behind a note that simply said, "It wants us. We have no choice." Isabel couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Something terrible had been happening in rural Maine at the turn of the century, and somehow Amaya Caden's photographs had captured evidence of it. But why hadn't anyone noticed before? Why had these photos sat in storage for over 100 years without anyone seeing what was clearly visible in them? She reached out to her colleague, a photography expert named Olive, who specialized in early photographic techniques. Isabel sent Olive high-resolution scans of all 7 photographs and asked her to analyze them. Was this some kind of double exposure? A developing error? Some trick of early photography that could explain the anomalies? Olive spent 3 days examining the images using modern digital analysis tools. Her response shook Isabel to her core. The anomalies were not photographic errors. They were not double exposures or developing mistakes. According to Olive's analysis, the figures in the windows were present in the original negatives, captured at the same moment as the rest of the image. They were real. Or at least they were really there when the photographs were taken. Olive also noted something else strange. The chemical composition of the photographic plates showed unusual degradation patterns around the areas where the figures appeared, as if something had literally burned itself into the image at a molecular level. Isabel knew she had stumbled onto something huge. She started researching disappearances and unexplained deaths in rural New England between 1890 and 1910. What she found was a pattern of horror that had been deliberately buried and forgotten. Over 24 families had vanished or died mysteriously in a concentrated area of Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. In almost every case, the official records were sparse, contradictory, or had been destroyed. It was as if someone had systematically erased these events from history. She found references to a regional investigation that had been conducted in 1904 by a team of researchers from Boston. They had been looking into the disappearances and deaths, trying to find a common cause, but their final report was never published. Isabel tracked down references to the investigation in old newspaper articles and personal letters. The research team had apparently concluded that the events were connected, but their findings were suppressed. One member of the team, a physician named Dr. Thomas Whitmore, wrote in a private letter that they had been threatened by powerful people who wanted the investigation shut down. He mentioned evidence of something that challenges our understanding of reality itself, but wouldn't elaborate further. Why would someone want to cover this up? Isabel couldn't understand it. Then she found something that made everything click into place. In 1903, there had been a massive land development scheme in rural Maine. Wealthy investors from Boston and New York were buying up farmland at rock-bottom prices, planning to develop it into industrial sites and railroad corridors. The disappearances and deaths had caused property values to plummet. Families were abandoning their homes out of fear, and investors were able to buy the land for almost nothing. Isabel discovered that one of the primary investors was a man named Richard Ashford, a railroad magnate with political connections that reached all the way to the governor's office. Ashford had personally purchased over 3,000 acres in the affected region between 1902 and 1905, including the Morrison property. When the investigation team from Boston started asking questions and making connections, Ashford used his influence to shut them down. The evidence was seized, the final report was buried, and the investigators were paid off or threatened into silence. But that didn't explain what was actually happening. What were the figures in the photographs? Why were families dying or vanishing? Isabel couldn't accept that it was just a coincidence that the terror started right when Ashford wanted to buy land. She went back through all the historical records again, this time looking for any connection between Ashford and the affected properties. And then she found it. Before Richard Ashford made his fortune in railroads, he had been involved in something much darker. In the 1880s, he had funded archaeological expeditions in Maine, searching for Native American artifacts and sites. One of his teams had excavated a pre-colonial burial ground in 1887, located in the exact center of the area where the disappearances would later occur. According to expedition notes that Isabel found in a university archive, the team had uncovered something unusual: a series of stone chambers that appeared to be much older than any known Native American structures in the region. Inside one of the chambers, they found what they described as effigies of disturbing aspect and inscriptions in no known language. The expedition notes mentioned that the team had removed several artifacts from the site and that strange events began happening almost immediately. Workers reported seeing figures that vanished when approached. Sounds of whispering came from empty spaces. One worker died in his sleep with no apparent cause. The expedition was abandoned, but the site remained disturbed, the chambers broken open and exposed to the elements. And over the next decade, the horror spread outward from that central point, affecting every family within a 15-mile radius. Isabel realized with growing horror that Ashford had known what he was doing. He had disturbed something that should have remained buried, and when it started affecting the local population, he saw an opportunity. Instead of trying to fix the problem or warn people, he used the terror to drive down land prices so he could buy the properties cheap. He had profited from people's deaths and disappearances, and he had covered up the truth to protect his investment. But the story didn't end in 1905. Isabel started looking for more recent records about the area. The land that Ashford had purchased was eventually developed into various industrial sites, but by the 1950s, most of them had been abandoned. She found reports of accidents and strange occurrences at these sites throughout the 20th century. Workers seeing figures in the shadows, unexplained equipment failures, a pattern of suicides and disappearances that continued right up to the present day. Whatever had been disturbed in 1887 was still active, still affecting people who entered the area. Isabel made a decision. She gathered all her evidence, all the photographs, all the historical records, and she prepared a comprehensive report. She was going to publish it. She was going to tell the world what had happened in rural Maine and what was still happening. But the night before she planned to submit her findings to a historical journal, something happened that made her question everything. She was working late in her office at the Historical Society, organizing her final documents. The building was empty. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. Isabel was alone in the archives, or so she thought. As she was scanning the last photograph into her computer, she heard a sound. Footsteps in the hallway outside her office. Slow, deliberate footsteps that didn't sound quite right. They were too heavy, too measured, as if whoever was walking was learning how to move as they went. Isabel froze. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. She stared at the frosted glass window, watching for a shadow, for any sign of who was there. And then she saw it. A pale face pressed against the glass, with dark hollow eyes that she recognized immediately. It was the same face from the photograph, the same distorted features, the same wrong expression. The face from 1901 was staring at her through her office door in the present day. Every instinct told her to run, but she couldn't move. The face stayed pressed against the glass for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. Then it pulled back and the footsteps resumed, moving away down the hallway. Isabel heard the fire exit door at the end of the hall open and close. She waited another 5 minutes before she found the courage to move. When she finally opened her office door and looked down the hallway, there was no one there. But on the glass window of her door, there was a handprint that was too large and had too many fingers. Isabel didn't publish her report. She gathered all the original photographs, including the Morrison farmhouse image, and she locked them in the most secure vault in the Historical Society. She deleted all her digital scans and destroyed her research notes. She told no one what she had found or what she had seen, because she understood now that some things were buried for a reason. Some truths were too dangerous to reveal, but she couldn't let it go completely. She had to do something, even if she couldn't expose the whole truth. Isabel started a quiet campaign to have the affected area in rural Maine designated as a nature preserve, protecting it from development. She used environmental concerns and historical significance as her public arguments, never mentioning the real reason. It took her 2 years, but she succeeded. The land where the burial chambers had been disturbed, where Ashford had made his fortune in blood and terror, was now protected. No one could build there. No one could dig there. And most importantly, no one would move there and fall victim to whatever still lurked in that cursed ground. Isabel Tate never looked at another historical photograph the same way again. She understood now that the past isn't always safely in the past. Sometimes it reaches forward into the present, reminding us that there are mysteries we aren't meant to solve and horrors we aren't meant to understand. The Morrison family photograph remains locked away, a testament to a terror that began in 1901 and never really ended. And somewhere in rural Maine, in the protected wilderness that Isabel fought so hard to create, the old chambers still stand open, and the figures still wait in the windows of houses that no longer exist, watching for the next person who might disturb what should remain forever buried.